Hello, I am Jake Collins, and this is Knightmare Series 7, Episode 6, which was first broadcast on the 15th of October 1993. Series 7 has always been my second least favourite series of Knightmare, second only to Series 8, and I do like Series 7 significantly more than Series 8. Despite the fact that the rot which Series 8 suffers from sets in here in many ways. This introduction with the coins and the pictures and Treguard's face is quite informative. I'm not sure I really like the graphics, and that really sums up the problems we've got with Knightmare at this stage. There are new graphics, virtual reality, icons like that sand timer coming in. Tim Child obviously likes them. I think they look like crap, quite frankly, and are mainly unnecessary. It is very useful to have Treguard update us on all the details about the team's quest, where we're up to, just as Pickle used to with the Book of Quests, but it lacks the atmosphere, the feeling of an opening to a Knightmare episode that I enjoyed so much back in Series 4, and to some extent 5. Another big problem with Series 7 and 8 is Majida. As I implied on the previous commentary, I think she's a mistake for the show overall. She's a terrible replacement for Pickle. Poor old Jackie Suarez, I don't want to criticise her personally or as an actress, but the vibe that Treguard and Majida have, I don't like at all. I don't like their bickering. I think it takes a lot away from Treguard as a character, as a host in a position of power. It's just one of the many new aspects in Series 7 that makes it feel wrong, less like Knightmare should feel. And I've been talking about those things a lot in recent commentaries, and they just keep getting worse, and they're going to keep getting worse until the very end. In the spyglass sequence, Hordris has been captured. What a novelty! Whenever we see Hordris, from this point onwards until Knightmare's bitter end, he's been captured by the opposition, or he's in danger from the opposition in some way. We're asked to accept every time that Lord Fear wants to stop Hordris from helping Dungeoneers, which is why he sets these traps for Hordris. But Hordris never does help Dungeoneers anymore unless they're getting him out of traps that Lord Fear has set for him. I think it's really bad for Hordris to be in these positions all the time and be limited to that role on the show. I do like Lizard. Interestingly, Scarkill from the previous series has kind of been split into two characters. Scarkill and Lord Fear talking together through the spyglass worked very well, so that aspect of Scarkill lurking around in the background during these spyglass sequences has been developed into Lizard, and the Goblin Master in the dungeon with Gripper and Rock aspect of Scarkill has turned into Raptor. Blizzard and Raptor, both played, of course, by Clifford Barry, whose contribution to the final two series of Knightmare I do enjoy. Here's another one of them. Rather strange, his first appearance here in the Dwarf Tunnels. Clifford Barry is in every episode of Knightmare Series 7 and 8, bar 1, Series 8, Episode 4. He makes a very significant contribution to the show, and I enjoy it. I haven't mentioned the team yet. It's Alex, James, Neil and Richard from London. They get to level 3, of course, but Alex is a terrible dungeoneer. He wanders around when he should be keeping still and listening and waiting for instructions. He demands information from his advisors at inappropriate times when characters are talking, when Tregard and Majida are trying to do a little discussion about what's going on. Very inappropriate for a dungeoneer to be trying to control everything that's going on, demanding to be talked to, when really there are other things to get out of the way first. A good dungeoneer isn't just a puppet, but it knows when to keep quiet, which really should be quite a lot of the time. Neil, in the middle, doesn't know Alex's name, keeps calling him James, doesn't provide very good advising to this quest, Neil. Richard, his brother, provides absolutely no advising whatsoever. On the rare occasions when he does say something, it's always complete nonsense. James carries this team, and he does so very well in the face of extreme opposition from his three teammates, really. And it's James who makes it to level 3, in spite of his team rather than with them. Over the years I've found this quest more and more difficult to watch, as I've realised just how annoying and bad at it Alex is, and how the advisors are absolutely held up by James. Here's Jacqueline Joyce as Romana, a character I've never really enjoyed watching. I like Jacqueline Joyce as Martyr, but Romana is overly aggressive, tends to stumble through preset lines in places, though she's not the worst culprit for doing that in this series. That's Anthony Donovan as Grimaldi. Can't improvise to save his life, quite frankly. Jacqueline Joyce is good at improvising as Martyr, but there's just something about her playing Romana that doesn't quite fit. I never really liked the idea of the Air One looking after the dragons, in control of the dragons in some way. Smirkanov's had 2 series without Romana, and now she suddenly turns up and says she's in charge of him and what he does. Elita as his dragon rider was a much better concept. They were friends, associated in some way, but you can see how the idea of Romana kind of comes from Elita. Elita's gone missing, and so no one's been feeding Smirkanov. He needs someone looking after him at the end of Series 6, and that morphs into a keeper from the dedicated Air One people in Series 7. The graphics of Knightmare and the mythos of Knightmare have gone somewhat awry, in my opinion. The Trial by Spikes is a nice challenge. It always reminded me of some of the earlier challenges. The chessboard aspect reminded me of combat chess, although of course Trial by Spikes has nothing to do with chess itself. But it's a timing and footwork challenge, and it does feel, to me, quite classic Knightmare in many ways. You'll notice how Hugo knew that Romana was going to go through a line about counting aloud the number of squares, and he was going to have to elaborate to James. Traegard doesn't say to the whole team, watch her and write them down. It takes James to one side. James, write them down. Watch her and write them down, because that's the only way this team are ever going to get through this. Traegard knows, Hugo knows. James writes down the combination that Romana goes through and then guides Alex to do it. And that is what happens. But it's not all that's happening here, is it? There is a sight spell going on. Already you can see that the original concept of the sight spell has gone out of the window. When Simon was seeing through the helmet, the new helmet, it was actually like he was looking out of the visor, like a proper virtual reality display. But of course that turned out to be completely impractical. Here, they're seeing themselves doing the puzzle. This is terrible in so many ways, fundamentally, and with Alex in particular. This is the bit. Keep going, Alex. Keep going. When Alex can see what he's doing and where he's walking, he starts to think he knows better than James. And of course, he doesn't. It completely underlines what's wrong with the whole concept of sight magic. The advisors are supposed to tell the Dungeoneer where to step. That is the fundamental way that Knightmare works. However, as I said previously, Tim Child doesn't understand what he's got, why it's really good, why it works. He thinks of this too much as a living computer game, and so he thinks it's right that the new technology, the VR technology, is brought into it, and the Dungeoneer is able to see what's going on and where they're stepping. Completely flies in the face of what Knightmare's supposed to be. And as that scene illustrates perfectly, gets really, really awkward. James knew what he was doing there. Despite what they always try and convince us, it doesn't help the Dungeoneer or the team to have that VR display inside the new helmet. It actively hinders, and it makes the show feel less like Knightmare and play out less like Knightmare. It's a terrible idea. When it first happened, when Fidget gave Simon the sight spell, I thought, we haven't had enough magic in the last couple of series if we're going to have these kind of vision spells in this series, and we're going to hear spell casting from the team even more. That's a good thing. It took me a while to realise how, ironically, by going back to that old bit of gameplay, including magic in the quest, they were flying in the face of the fundamentals of playing Knightmare. We had a scene with the Brolican there, virtual actor. Anthony Donovan wearing the headset and producing these rather jerky, awkward mouth movements that don't match what he's saying. That's been shoved in because it can, really. There's no real role for the Brolican in the quest. He asked questions. Again, it reminds one of early Knightmare, all monsters with their questions, but it's so pointless because he doesn't know the answers. And it happens so much, usually once on level 2 and once on level 3, it really starts to get grating and repetitive. If they were going to have the Brolican in it, he could at least have been used as a real threat. That's something I feel about Dreadnought in Series 6 as well, actually. Dreadnought may be a real threat, but he's just a piece of animation technology coming in to do the job of an existing creature, a blocker, because Tim Child thinks it looks better. The Brolican is in this series because Tim Child thinks it's new and exciting and innovative technology and it looks good. That's really a lot of the trouble here. Things have been shoved in because they can be at this stage. Why? What purpose do they serve? Do they fit into the show? Do they have a role in the show? No, they don't. They just make Knightmare less like Knightmare. All these problems kick off here in Series 7 and come to a crescendo and make an absolute disaster out of Series 8, as I'll come on to say, in the near future. I've mentioned a couple of times the new helmet. It became obvious quite quickly why this change had been made. It is, basically, a VR helmet. The Dungeoneer no longer looks like a Dungeoneer. Here's this grayling appearance. We only see anything like this, we only see the grayling once on the show. Turn the light towards it, it won't attack head on. They have to remember that information from earlier in the level. Only James really did remember it, of course. Richard is trying to get Alex to turn back and get stabbed from behind. I would have liked to see that again in another quest. I thought it was quite an interesting idea. It's one of those little one-off interesting bits of Knightmare gameplay. But unlike all this VR stuff, it does feel suitably Knightmare. There's a bit of a design clash in Series 7, that reminds me, with these older real photo rooms and the VR rooms. It kind of works, meshing them together, but I do think it works better on level 3, Goth, which is all VR. Yes, with the new helmet, classic Knightmare feel has been completely sacrificed for the sake of technology. Pointless technology that detrimentally affects the show. But even if it was for the sake of, as Tim Child thought, really good, exciting new technology that was going to improve the show, they still shouldn't have done it. Replacing the Helmet of Justice under any circumstances, should never have been on the cards. It just goes to show how Tim Child doesn't always think about the viewing experience he is creating. As I said on a previous commentary, this is first and foremost a TV show, a viewing experience for its loyal fans. How are they going to feel if they see a new helmet instead of the iconic horned helmet of justice that we've had since the very first episode? How are they going to feel if they see a team win after only completing 2 levels? Just as a basic gut reaction, without looking back, analysing things to the nth degree, how is that first viewing experience that I've talked about before, that we take away and keep in our hearts, how is that going to be affected by these changes? Whatever the ins and outs of them, whatever the fairness or unfairness of any winning teams that win having completed 3 levels, some of which don't have proper challenges in them, if you include things like the new helmet and the shortcut, and that's a point I'll come back to, of course, when I talk about Series 8, it is going to spoil that initial viewing experience, and that's what's going to stick with the viewers. At least it always has with me. And that's where you fundamentally start unraveling the show, when you ruin the initial viewing experience. We're in Goth now anyway, and here's Lord Fear and Lissard in the Black Tower. I do like Goth. Stylistically, I like it. It's Knightmare, it's dungeony. Perhaps the VR isn't quite ready yet, but it works very well as it is. But the main reason I like it is that it completely solves that problem that we've had in the previous 2 series, which I've talked about quite extensively. The lack of consistency and identity in level 3. Here we have everything you could ever ask for. A definite, consistent, unique looking and feeling level 3 location. Goth works really well as that, and we haven't had that in the show since Series 4. So that just goes to show this new technology, graphics, could be used appropriately, could not ruin the show, but unfortunately, most of the time, it does. Treguard really is losing contact, that special link with us. He talks to us for a bit there at Temporal Disruption each time, and then has some banter with Majida, which is usually, if not always, horrendously irritating. And he goes through that very formulaic introduction with the gold coin bit that I was talking about earlier. But it's sneaking out of the show, Treguard's link with the Watchers, which is another great aspect of original Knightmare that's always been around before. And another thing, that as the rot has set in with it here in Series 7, it's going to come to a head and be completely rotted away, i.e. not there, in Series 8. Thank you for listening to this ranty Knightmare commentary. If you join me again next time, I should have some nicer things to say, as I'll be talking less about Series 7 in general and more about Julie and her team as I dissect Knightmare Series 7 episode 12.